I guess now there's sound on YouTube. All right, so I think um, maybe I'll just do a quick recap of the verses we read. So, starting with Surah 12, verse 103, the majority of people do not believe. Most people, no matter what you do, will not believe. You are not asking them for any money. You simply deliver this reminder for all the people. So many proofs in the heavens and the earth are given to them, but they pass by them heedlessly. The majority of those who believe in God do not do so without committing idol worship. Have they guaranteed that an overwhelming retribution from God will not strike them, or the hour will not come to them suddenly when they least expect it? Say, this is my path. I invite to God on the basis of a clear proof, and so do those who follow me. God be glorified. I am not an idol worshiper. We did not send before you except men whom we inspired, chosen from the people of various communities. Did they not roam the earth and see the consequences for those before them? The abode of the hereafter is far better for those who lead a righteous life. Would you then understand? So these verses are obviously talking about, majority of the believers, fall into idol worship, and majority of the people in general do not believe. And so the people who do believe end up falling in idol worship. And so the believers are going to be the minority of the minority. And God says in verse 110, victory ultimately belongs to the believers. Just when the messengers despair and think that they had been rejected, our victory comes to them. We then save whomever we choose, while our retribution for the guilty people is unavoidable. So this is God's guarantee that God ultimately grants victory to the believers, and they're always the winners. And the messengers are put to the test where they suffer a lot of persecution, a lot of hardship from people, and then eventually, God allows them to be successful, and God allows the message to prevail. And God says, then He saves whomever we choose, while our retribution for the guilty people is unavoidable. And so the guilty people are those who disbelieve, and ultimately they suffer the retribution, either as collective retribution or individual annihilation from God. And this is God's unchangeable system. The Quran is all we need. In their history, there is a lesson for those who possess intelligence. This is not fabricated hadith. This Quran confirms all previous scriptures, provides the details of everything, and is a beacon and mercy for those who believe. So this verse, as the subtitle says, the Quran is all we need, right? The Quran is all we need, meaning we don't need any other scriptures, we don't need any other sources besides the Quran as a source of law and guidance. So everything that we need to learn about our religion is mentioned here in the Quran. If something is not in the Quran, is not mentioned in the Quran, then we know that it is not part of our religion. And we cannot say that we may find an audio or a video where there may be some other commandments. There will be none, because the messenger also followed the Quran alone, and he preached the Quran alone. So if it's not in the Quran, you can rest assured that he didn't ordain it or didn't order it for people to do it, right? Because our source is the Quran. If it's not in the Quran, we don't accept it. Everything that we need to understand is in the Quran. All the history of the previous messengers that we need to learn, that is important for our salvation, all of it is in the Quran. If it's in the previous scriptures, it's confirmed in the Quran, as long as it is important for us to know that information. God has put it also for us in the Quran. Some information is different from the previous scriptures that we find about the previous messengers, such as Abraham, and God has confirmed the truth, and He has shown us, through showing us the truth, that the rest is all falsehood. And things may or may not be right, or things may sound beautiful, but as long as they're not conformance with the Quran, as long as they're not confirmed by the Quran, we cannot accept them. And this is a very strict principle, and that Quran is our only source of religious guidance. And anybody who seeks any other source besides the Quran, ends up falling in the trap of idol worship, which explains how most of the quote unquote Muslims are going to hell because they have taken other sources besides the Quran, and other people from other religions as well, simply just because they have taken other sources as a source of guidance, besides God's scripture. And this is an important commandment for us to always keep in mind. So God willing, I continue reading Surah 13, Thunder, Arad. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. ALMR. These letters are proofs of this scripture. What is revealed to you from your Lord is the truth, but most people do not believe. So the footnote says, for 13.1, says these initials constitute a major component of the Quran's built-in proof of divine authorship, the miraculous mathematical code. See Appendix 1. And if you see Appendix 1, there's a very elaborate system that God has put in place in the Quran, and how ALMR. This is ALMR, right? So this is mentioned in Surah 13, and the frequency of occurrence of these four letters, ALMR or Alif Lam Mim Ra, is 1482 or 19 times 78. And so this proves to us, from the very beginning, from the outset, God lets us know that everything we're reading in these surahs are unaltered words of God, and no one other than God can possibly author it. And so we have full confidence that we are following, divine revelations from God, and it has not been altered. So verse 2, God is the one who raised the heavens without pillars that you can see, then assumed all authority. He committed the sun and the moon, each running in its orbit for a predetermined period. He controls all things and explains the revelations that you may attain certainty about meeting your Lord. He is the one who constructed the earth and placed on it mountains and rivers, and from the different kinds of fruits he made them into pairs, males and females. The night overtakes the day. These are solid proofs for people who think. SubhanAllah. So when you just think about these two verses, they're filled with incredible information and incredible scientific information. We understand that the sky doesn't have any pillars, and contrary to the views that theories that people had about the sky, and all of that, included like pillars and things like that, and we see here that God says that. Then God also tells us that each of them is running for a predetermined period, and in another verse also it talks about in their own orbits. So the Quran confirms that they're all running in their orbits, like each of them is running, right? So just the part that each of them is running, negates so many, previously, held theories among the people that thought that, some people thought that the sun is stationary, some people thought that the earth is stationary, other people thought, God knows, that the moon is stationary and all kinds of stuff, right? But God says each of them is running, right? And so we know that, everything has its orbit. The earth has its orbit, the sun has its orbit, the moon has its orbit, the Milky Way, and so forth, So everything has its orbit, and he controls all things, and he allows the night to overtake the day he placed on earth. He constructed the earth and placed on it mountains and rivers, and especially talks about from the fruits, he made them into pairs, male and female. So this is also amazing that God knows that among the fruits there are males and females. There's plants that are male plants, and then there are female plants, and then they can also create fruits and then still create males and females, right? And so God says these are solid proofs for people who think. And the night overtakes the day. We see the constant revolution of the earth, resulting in the day and night time on a regular basis for us, as a timing device for us, as a means of us to seek God's provisions, as a means of us to rest. I mean, all these are elaborate things that are designed very specifically for a very specific reason. And if any of these things were missing from the equation, I mean, life on earth would be impossible, right? But God has made life on earth possible through reproduction, even through these plants that God talks about, that they're reproducing, into males and females. Imagine if they just started producing the males, and they will just die, right? And there would be no cross pollination. Or if the night stopped and there was no day, I mean, people would just freeze to death, and people on the other end will just, be cooked. So these are all signs from God, solid proofs from God that He has made this elaborate system that's going around nonstop for us till the end of time. And for people who ponder upon it and think about God, it provides for them a means to remember God and reflect on, His qualities, reflect on His omnipotence. Because when you think about it more and more, I mean, how God creates these creations and how vast they are in their, varieties, and how different they are from each other, and how they all thrive in nature despite all of these differences in their own design and differences in the environments. God causes them to continue on flawlessly, flawlessly. SubhanAllah, and no one other than God can do that, and there's no other explanation for that if we really think about it. Verse 4, on earth there are adjacent lots that produce orchards of grapes, crops, palm trees, dioecious and non-dioecious. Although they're irrigated with the same water, we prefer some of them over others in eating. These are solid proofs for people who understand. And so same thing, God is mentioning here about the different lots of orchards of grapes and crops and palm trees. All these are signs from us. I mean, look at palm trees, like, they need so little water, and they grow in the desert and have, all kinds of nourishment in the fruits that they offer, so much, so nutritious, and such a great source of complex sugars for the human being to have sustained energy. Let's say, if you were in a desert and were restrained. So God says, although they're irrigated with the same water, we prefer some of them above others in eating. And so all these things are created with the same water, and some things God prefers over others in eating. I mean, we see some fruits that are delicious, and others not so much. I mean, some ripe very well, and others may not. And how God has, just the whole process of these fruits, even maturing and being ripe. I mean, this is just an amazing sign from God that how they change their colors as indicators that they're ripe and ready to eat, and how they're able to loosely fall versus the ones that are new. They're stuck to the ground and hard to fetch. And so all these there's so many proofs in all of these things, once we start to think about them. Verse 5, belief in the hereafter required for salvation. If you ever wonder, the real wonder is there, saying, after we turn into dust, do we get recreated anew? These are the ones who have disbelieved in their Lord. These are the ones who have incurred shackles around their necks. These are the ones who have incurred hell, wherein they abide forever. They challenge you to bring doom upon them rather than turning righteous. Sufficient precedents have been set for them in the past. Indeed, your Lord is full of forgiveness towards the people in spite of their transgressions, and your Lord is also strict in enforcing retribution. Those who disbelieved say, if only a miracle could come down to him from his Lord, we will then believe. You are simply a warner. Every community receives a guiding teacher. So, God tells us here that the belief in the hereafter is very important for every person in order to make it to God. If you want to go to heaven, you must believe in the hereafter. Um, if you don't believe in the hereafter, um, the criterion is mentioned in the Quran. I mean, you'll fall in some kind of idol worship, some fancy words, and you'll fall off the path. Even though your devils that are your companions at that point will make you believe that you're on the right path, but you would be going astray without ever knowing about it. And so belief in the hereafter is very, very important, and we have to constantly remind ourselves that we wake up every morning, and God has, for that reason alone, I think, God allows us to sleep and wake up. There's death and resurrection for us every day, and when you start to think about it, like, when you go to sleep and how you went to sleep and where were you after that and how you just, came back to life. It's something that we see every day, and it's so common, yet it's so difficult for people to understand that this is something that will happen on the day of judgment. If you tell people that humans can be cloned, they will believe you, because life can be cloned in some fashion, or generate certain organs from part of your DNA and things like that, and they will believe that. But when you tell them about resurrection, they think that, oh, these are just tales from the past. But we understand that God is the one who created us, and He can recreate us. It's like you built a computer already, right? Now all you have to do is turn it on, turn it off, turn it back on again. It's so simple. As far as God is concerned, God has already created us. It's not like He doesn't know how to create humans. He has created us. He has created me and you with all the specific characteristics that we have. And God says He can reconstruct our fingertips. So He knows each and every single piece of us, and He can construct us and destruct us exactly the same way as many times as He wants. So why is it so hard for people to think that He cannot do it again, just a second time? And this, obviously, is something that comes down under, God's believing in God's omnipotence. That if you think that God cannot do something, you don't believe in God. And so this is why it's important for people to believe in the hereafter without seeing the angels, without seeing the hereafter, without seeing God. But yet most people will fail this test despite understanding or having the capacity to understand that God can do it very easily. So verse 8, God knows what every female bears and what every womb releases and gains. Everything He does is perfectly measured. The knower of all secrets and declarations, the Supreme, the Most High. It is the same whether you conceal your thoughts or declare them, or hide in the darkness of the night, or act in the daylight. So also God says that these people will demand all kinds of demands, and ask for miracles, and put conditions, and say, if you show us this and this, then we'll then believe. And God says, even if you show them all the things that they're demanding, they're still not going to believe, because they're disbelievers, and they're destined to disbelieve no matter what kind of proof comes in front of them. They're going to be disbelievers. We see the example of Pharaoh and how he saw all these obvious proofs in front of him, yet he could not believe in God, and he could not believe what was in front of his eyes. He felt it was magic, even though all the magicians fell prostrate. He still couldn't, So God says, you're simply a warner. Every community receives a guiding teacher. And so we understand that every community receives a guiding teacher, and the Messenger of the Covenants explains it as, every community, meaning like even when you hear the message and you go and talk to your family members or friends or coworkers, those are sort of communities that are then receiving the message as well. So you're not a commissioned messenger, but in some sense you are actually a messenger, presenting information. So God allows the message to be received in this manner uh, by all the people, by sending these secondary people who relay the information that they have heard from God's commissioned messengers. And so these people will bear witness against them on the day of judgment that they did give them the message. And God says He knows what every female bears and what every womb releases or gains. Everything God does is precisely measured. And so we understand that obviously everything that God does is precisely measured. He knows that He has calculated our provisions precisely. He has put everything in a perfect balance, including things in nature, provisions, plants, all the animals in the ecosystem, everything, all the stars, all the planets, everything is in precise measure, and He knows where each and everything is and what each and everything is supposed to be doing at a certain time, and everything precisely follows that design, and God is in full control, and everything is happening in accordance with God's will. And it's important for us to remember that. The reason why God is telling us again and again is important, that we remember that God is the knower of all secrets and declarations. Anything that we do in the night, whether we declare it or not, even our deepest thoughts, God is aware of them. So we cannot hide anything from God. So we cannot fool God in any way, right? So we have to be very honest with ourselves, and we have to be very honest with God, and we have to constantly check ourselves. A lot of times people will say things out loud where they know they're safe, or even in their own privacy, they might say things um, that they feel is safe, but inside their heads, they can have all kinds of thoughts going on. But we have to understand that God is witnessing all of those thoughts as well. God is witnessing everything in our innermost subconscious, and we're held accountable for all our thoughts as well, right? So we have to have the right thoughts. If you don't have the right thoughts, how are you gonna transform them into actions? And whatever you think is eventually, what you become, right? So we have to make sure that we remember that all the time. Verse 11 says, shifts of angels take turns, staying with each one of you. They're in front of you and behind you. They stay with you and guard you in accordance with God's commands. Thus, God does not change the condition of any people unless they themselves make the decision to change. If God wills any hardship for the people, no force can stop it, for they have none beside Him as a Lord and Master. So God tells us that shifts of angels take turns staying with each of you. They're in front of you and behind you. They stay with you and guard you in accordance with God's commands, right? And so we have guardian angels, giants that are commissioned by God to protect us, and there are shifts of them that take turns, right? And so we are under God's protection by these angels. They understand to what degree we all deserve God's protection. If these angels were not there, I don't think that any of us would possibly be able to live the life that we're living right now. So many bad things could have happened, but these angels protect us in accordance with God's will, based on God's design, and based on His knowledge about us. And I think Psalms 91 is a very good explanation of how God allows His angels to protect you, and how God's angels are the best surgeons, and how God's angels are the best protectors. They'll even remove a stone if you're about to dash your foot against a stone, for example, and things like that. Things that you will not even know how divinely and miraculously, God can, look after people and, give them blessings left and right through these angels, and facilitate, their life on earth. Depending on how righteous they are, obviously, if they're good believers, they're very fortunate, and they're fully protected by God in His kingdom. And it reminds me of the time where the messenger of the covenant talks about how this woman in Haiti was a disbeliever, and she tried to do some witchcraft against him, and his angels, when the devil came to inflict him, the angels told him to go and do it back on the person who sent him, and so that person ended up almost dying as a result. And so God, this is how God protects. So a lot of times people will panic that people will think that someone has done this witchcraft or that spell on me and this and that. I mean, it happens. And from time to time, you even hear from submitters that have the same concerns, right? But we understand that if you are doing everything in your part to be with God, if you're leading a righteous life, nothing can harm you except in accordance with God's will. If you step out of God's kingdom, if you decide to do something wrong and forsake that protection, then anything can happen to you, right? But as long as you're following God's commandments, nothing bad will happen to you, and you will be protected no matter what. And these verses, are talking about how, as it says, if God wills any hardship for any people, no force can stop it, for they have none beside God, none beside Him as a Lord and Master. So imagine if someone steps out of God's kingdom and they get inflicted with some kind of disease, like say AIDS or cancer, right? I mean, now it's God's. If it's God's will that this person is supposed to be healed, he would be miraculously even healed, without even the interference from any of the doctors or the surgeons. But if God wills for this person to suffer based on the choices that they have made, obviously God doesn't want anybody to suffer. But if they decided to disbelieve and let go of God's protection, and Satan wants to inflict this person at that time, it's in accordance with God's will, and God will allow it to happen. And all the people in the world can get together and try to save the situation, but they won't be able to, right? Because it's in accordance with God's will at this time. And God says in verse 12, He's the one who shows you the lightning as a source of fear as well as hope, and He initiates the loaded clouds. The thunder praises His glory, and so do the angels, out of reverence for Him. He sends the lightning bolts which strike in accordance with His will, yet they argue about God, though His power is awesome. Imploring Him is the only legitimate supplication, while the idols they implore beside Him cannot ever respond. Thus they are like those who stretch their hands to the water, but nothing reaches their mouths. The supplications of the disbelievers are in vain. SubhanAllah. So the title of this chapter is Thunder, Al-Rad, and God says in verse 13, of Surah 13, that the thunder praises His glory, and so do the angels out of reverence for Him. So the thunder is following God's law. It's a phenomenon that God has created. There are obviously scientific ways to explain how it forms and everything else, but so is everything else. There's scientific explanation for why a human being exists, but nevertheless, God is the one who created all of these creatures and all of these things, and the thunder is praising God's glory when it happens, and shows God's power, right? God's immense power, and how the electricity flows through those clouds, and how it strikes in accordance with God's will. People who get struck by lightning, sometimes people get killed, and they say, but it says, yet they argue about God, though His power is awesome. And imploring God is the only legitimate supplication. And God says, well, the idols they implore cannot respond. You constantly see people imploring other idols besides God. It's just in the Middle East, and just day and night, hearing people commemorate Muhammad, and but we understand that the disbelievers, they stretch their supplication is in vain, and they're praying to God. I remember going to Saudi Arabia, and like we were doing Umrah, and like you're trying to focus on God, and then there's people like circling around and like, s- you know, yelling very loudly like "Ya Rasulullah," and do this and do that, like so crazy. You see, it just scared me every time I heard these things. It made me cringe. Like you're you're in Mecca, right in the middle, and it's like you're just asking God to strike you, like right now. And but these, this shows that we're in Satan's domain, and how these people are hypnotized by Satan, that they're there, in God's sacred masjid, and they're imploring other idols. Why don't you implore God? And God says, so there are like those who stretch their hands to the water, but nothing reaches their mouth. It's like, imagine someone going to a stream, and you put your hands out, but your hands are maybe flat or something, and the water is just flowing out. You can't drink any of it, right? So they're like those who stretch their hands to the water, but nothing reaches their mouth. So if you just stretch your hands to the water, water is not automatically going to come to you, right? And it's just like that, the supplication of the disbelievers, God says, in vain. On the other hand, God says He answers the prayers of the believers. He's here and near, and so if we want our prayers to be answered, we must be on the right path. We must remember to forsake any idols in our lives, no matter what they are, and devote our worship absolutely to God alone, and pray to God for His forgiveness and redemption. And so with this, God willing, I will end. And if you guys have any comments or questions, please feel free. Thank you.
MashaAllah, thank you, brother.
MashaAllah, thank you.
I find it funny, brother, how you had mentioned how idolatry is. It seems like a very obvious thing, right? People say, oh, sticks and stones, and that's it, right? But it's very easy to get caught in that trap, especially in today's day and age. Everybody says, oh, you must have a mentor or somebody to help you.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to take advice. There's no doubt about it, but the advice you're given cannot help you against the will of God. If God does not will you to have something happen, it won't happen, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But you even see that nowadays. A lot of these, whatever gurus, right? Whatever industry they're in or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
people, think that listening to this guy is going to solve all their problems. This, that, and the other person, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's it's easy to fall into the trap of idolatry, especially if you compromise in your head or justify in your head as to, oh, this isn't it because you don't consider them a god or anything like that. Well, it's the same thing that people consider Muhammad more than he is, right? When it comes down to, uh, you know, uh, what would you say, regular,
Mm-hmm.
like Sunni Muslims or Shiite Muslims,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
They they I idolize him, and they're blinded. They think that, oh, no, he's a messenger. Well, yeah, but who sent him, right? Nobody's gonna praise the postman because he gave you a message,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And not to discredit the prophet, but that being said, it's because of God's will that it all happened. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just made me kind of reflect in my own life that yeah,
Mm-hmm.
idolization is very easy, and we must guard ourselves against it.
Yeah. Subhanallah. True. I'm just thinking, when I mentioned about the Umrah, like I was there and all these people, like this one person I remember who was yelling at, like, it sounded like he was yelling at Muhammad, it was like, but then there was other people, like there was a lot of groups, and like I think part of the reason why, like, I think we were able to complete a lot of it very quickly, I think, when we did it, was because I was always running away from these groups, because I didn't have headphones or anything on, and so I could hear everything everybody was saying, and I think it was a huge mistake. I probably should have had my headphones with me, but like every time I would run into people, like groups, and they would be chanting, like, Darood on Muhammad and everything, and I just start running faster and faster, and then I'd run into another group, and then I'd run faster again. That's how I think that was my motivation to finish it, mashallah, very quickly.
Maybe God willed so that way you'd burn some calories. Who knows?
Congratulations,
Thank you, mashallah.
Suleman, on your umrah.
Thank you. Yeah, you must have had the same experience, right? When you.
Oh God, yes. Umrah and also Hajj. Hajj was the worst.
Mm,
Because you're in that state of ihram and you don't want to
mm-hmm.
confront people.
Oh
And
yeah.
I remember I was sitting down. It was like towards the end. I was sitting down in where they do the prayers around the Kaaba. I
Mm-hmm.
was sitting down and this man was sitting next to me and he was clearly a Shia or something. And then he was saying that the prayer of intercession loudly,
Mm-hmm.
saying all these names like, oh, this and that. I don't know. I beg you to intercede for me. I was just like, oh, I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
stop. I was just like,
Right.
and he was standing up, shouting and stuff. I was like, you are in the Kaaba. You're in the temple of God. And
Mm-hmm.
you're saying all these names. This is all idol worship. And he started shouting at me, oh,
Oh
have
my
you?
God.
And he was saying these Arabic words and stuff. This is the verse that God says you have to ask for intercession. And I'm in the state of Abraham. I don't want to start like arguing with this guy. And I'm like, oh gosh.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I haven't even heard the translation that you're just telling me. And
Mm-hmm.
I looked away. I was just still singing that. And then he started chanting a bit higher and louder as well.
Oh my
So I
God.
couldn't do it. Sorry, I just stood up
Yeah.
and go and sat the other side. It's just so terrible when you're doing all these when you're circumvoluting the Kaaba.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that you are the only one that is actually just
Mm-hmm.
calling God.
Yeah. Exactly.
Honestly, some people you think that, oh, okay, this guy is only saying God, God, and then you just listen a little bit more, and then there it goes. A name comes up. It's very bad.
Mm-hmm.
God says, do not allow idol worshippers
Mm-hmm.
enter the sacred message. Why confessing to their idolatry?
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
the state of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's very sad. It was really, really sad. I
Mm-hmm.
had really hard time the first time.
Yeah, I mean, that is one challenge, I think, and I think a good strategy for that is to just put on your headphones or something. Um,
No, I want to be present. But
no, you can be
when I
present.
say I'm in present, you have to. The messenger said you say your labbaik, Allahumma labbaik.
Uh huh.
You say your prayers as you do. And I want to be, present, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
be like very natural as I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But it's just very sad. I remember the first
Mm-hmm.
time I was crying. I was really crying. I was just saying, "Oh my God," you know.
Mm-hmm.
It gets to you. Mm. But congratulations
Yeah.
for your umrah.
Thank you.
So
Inshallah.
what could you do Hajj? Did you go to the other places where they opened? So could you? Of
Um.
course, it was not during the months, but were they open somehow that
Well,
you could have
so
done it
the
outside of season?
well, the only thing that was closed, I think we kind of went everywhere, but the part that we didn't see was the Mina. Like we saw it from the outside,
Mm.
but we were in a tour bus, and they didn't take
Mm-hmm.
us in there. But I think it was closed, you know. But I think during other times, around the months of Hajj, you know, it's
Hajj.
usually open, you know. So
Yeah, I don't think you would be able to go in there because it's really strict in
yeah,
terms of
I mean, people are doing
each of
that.
those ones.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, people are doing that. I recently, one person I remember did it in the last month of Hajj. You know, just at towards the very end of the 4 month period, he just did his Hajj. You know, I
Mm.
didn't ask. Maybe
I
he did it with a
got a
group.
show
Yeah.
from.
Hmm.
You could stay in the hotels around the area, around
Hmm.
Mina,
Yeah,
but
I
not
mean,
in the actual place that they have set up the
hmm,
tents.
yeah, I mean, I think like based on what things I've heard, like if you want to,
Hmm.
like you know, there are ways you can do it. You know, like but the thing is like
Okay.
during this time, like outside of those 4 month period itself is like just completely closed, you know. But I think around that time they want it to be open because they're, you know, preparing or doing things and stuff, or you know, even letting people
Okay.
visit. Yeah, so they
Okay.
open it. Yeah.
Okay. So inshallah, next day.
So any
You guys.
comments about the verses?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, it really makes you value the perspective of these prophets and messengers we read about.
Hmm.
Uh, realistically, we live in a fairly liberal time where we can still practice things without, um, I don't know, like immediate death or persecution in that kind of way. But yet, we talk about Abraham or even Yusuf or anybody. They lived in predominantly polytheist times, right?
Hmm.
And like the things that you guys experienced, I could only imagine it was much worse, right?
Hmm.
Not to discredit what happened. I could have when Sister Mona said, you gotta hold, being ikram, right? Well,
Hmm.
I can understand how like your blood would, maybe step up a point in terms of pressure, right?
Hmm.
But you see what Abraham had to deal with. You had this even Prophet Muhammad, right? And you see this all around, and it really gives you insight that, like, yeah, it's bad now, and I guess it always has been. Maybe it's a patience, or I don't know, but God willing, we'll persevere regardless of what happens around us.
Hmm. Yeah, for me, my only instinct was to just run away from these people. I didn't want to argue with anybody or get upset or anybody or you know try to guide anybody. I just wanted to just be as far as possible so I don't have to deal with it. You
I bet you're a good marathon runner now.
know. All right. So we read from 13, 103. Sorry, 12:103 to 13 verse 14. So if there are any comments about the verses that we read, um, you know, please feel free. Any comments or questions? Um,
Yeah, I wanted to talk about verse 3 in chapter 13. Relationship. What God says, well, the subtitle is Belief in the Hereafter Required for Salvation. I mean, God said, if you ever wonder, the real wonder is they're saying, after we turn into dust, do we get recreated anew? And then the three sentences come after that. It shows how terrible this concept is that people cannot believe in God. They cannot believe in God's power. And they cannot believe in God's omnipotence. And God says these are the ones that have disbelieved in their laws. These are the ones that have incurred shackles around their necks. These are the ones that have incurred hell where they abide forever. See, this is a really intense, this is a really important verse that God has been emphasizing on the fact that how these people are astray and how wrong they are in their disbelief. Um, I remember the verse where God is talking about, and it's 38:45. And God says, "Remember also our servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were resourceful and possessed vision." And then the next verse says, "We bestowed upon them a great blessing." And what was the great blessing? Awareness of the hereafter. You see, so these, at that time, we're talking about a few thousand years ago, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God blessed them and bestowed them the awareness of the hereafter. And God calls that a great blessing. So it's God that bestows that blessing upon his servants, on those that really believe in him and they devote their religion to God. So this is a great blessing that God bestowed upon him. He mentioned that he bestowed upon Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob the belief of the hereafter, awareness in the hereafter.
I think that that verse is that there are many messengers before those verses, if I'm not mistaken, sister. Can you read from the little bit like maybe 5 verse
Yeah.
before? I think there are many messengers as they got these blessings, and I was actually thinking the same verse, and I looked at it.
Mm.
It would be nice to hear
So,
maybe.
so the verse 41 is about Job, where God says, "Remember our servant Job, called upon his Lord." And then 42, then when God removes his hardship, he says, "Strike the ground with your foot," but to remove the hardship. And then the next verse, 43, God says God makes it up to the believer. Then he restores his family to him. And then he says, "Now you shall travel the land and preach the message." And then 45, God says, "Remember also our servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were resourceful and possessed vision. We bestowed upon them a great blessing, awareness of the hereafter. They were chosen, for they were amongst the most righteous." And then God says, "Remember Ishmael, Elijah, and Zechariah, among the most righteous." And then God talks about the righteous. This is a reminder, righteous have deserved a wonderful destiny. But that verse is specifically about those three.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is, God blessed the awareness of the hereafter on all of these messengers, right? So,
Of course, but what I'm saying is that this verse is specifically talking about those three at that place. And God says they were chosen, they were the most righteous amongst the most righteous.
yeah, I mean, all of these messengers were chosen by God. They were among the most righteous, right? I mean, also the thing is, like we have to be careful because again, it can become a place of distinction, making a distinction among the messengers if we think that some of them were more righteous than others or things like that. Now this kind of interpretation is clearly implying that these messengers were more righteous than the other messengers because it's just
No, I don't mean that. I'm just
no, I
saying
know
that
you don't mean
there
that,
are
but I'm saying
specific verses here. These are about Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, and the next one goes about the righteous. The one before was about Job. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that these are the different ones. I'm saying these three verses are relevant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob specifically. Mm.
Yeah, but I'm saying that in continuation of that, there's also the verse that says they were chosen by God for they were among the most righteous, right? So and so if and we bless upon them the awareness of the hereafter. So if you're saying that these verses only are talking about these specific messengers, then obviously that sends a message that these messengers were more righteous and they were chosen more than the others, because these, if they're only talking about those messengers, you know what I'm saying? So it couldn't have been, in other words, it couldn't have been talking about just those messengers specifically. It would be talking about all these messengers. They were chosen by God, for they were among the most righteous, and obviously they were all aware of the hereafter. God blessed upon them awareness of the hereafter. But I mean, we can interpret it both ways. But I'm just thinking out loud that, if you think that is only implying about these specific messengers, then it's also implying that these were the messengers that were chosen, for they were among the most righteous, right? Or so it may open a trap, maybe, I don't know. Because we're not supposed to make distinction among the messengers.
So I'm looking. Can I have a comment about verse 10? And also, can I have a question? It says, "It is the same whether you conceal your thoughts or declare them, or hide in the darkness of the night, or act in the daylight." So I agree, like we're held accountable, for things we do and say, and then we can even think. But I mean, like, what if our jinn whispers something to us, like really stupid, like you could be driving, or just, like, is that something we're held accountable, or is that like more of does
I
that
mean,
fall on the jinn, or you know, like immediately, I seek refuge. I mean, it's not like it happens often, but
mm-hmm,
it kind of
mm-hmm,
scares me a little bit, because it's like I don't. I mean, it's like what you said, and
mm-hmm,
I mean, like it's we shouldn't have like a single bad thought,
mm-hmm,
um, like nothing unpleasing to God, which I've heard before, which is like a really good thing, but it also kind of
mm-hmm.
makes me super nervous,
Yeah,
because like sometimes our thoughts, like out of nowhere, and it's like,
yeah.
oh man, I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Satan's not gonna leave us alone, and he's gonna continuously try to whisper, and your jinn will also try to argue with you, and suggest bad things. But then that's not on you. That's on the jinns, right? Who are whispering, or I mean, your jinn that is whispering this to you, or Satan, because how you deal with it is what matters for you, right? I mean, your response, your
So,
response is, to seek refuge in God. Say, Rabbi, a'udhu bika min hamazat ash-shayateen wa a'udhu bika rabbi an yuhdirun, as many times as you can, as much as it bothers you, and when you hear it, you say it, and so the messenger, as he talked about, he said, even if you say it like, I don't know, 1,000 times a day, he said, I don't know, he said it's not enough. That's how bad he is. I mean, he doesn't leave you alone. He looks for moments when he can come at you and suggest these negative thoughts, ideas. He preys on you in your weakest moments, but it's how you respond to it, which is what counts for you, right? If you start agreeing with him and start playing along with those ideas and start believing in them, then that matters, right, for you. But if you're arguing with him, and you're telling yourself that this is wrong, and this is the right thing, by God, to seek refuge first, and then counter, argue, or say the right thing, then that's what counts for you, right?
yeah, that makes perfect sense, and right, because if like if he's saying something right, and we sit there and agree with him, then like yeah, you start to agree, and then
Mm-hmm.
you're in agreement with him, yeah, you're guilty, but.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe we could even get credit too, if he's whispering
Mm-hmm.
something,
Mm-hmm. Of course.
silly, stupid, or not good, we sit there and be like, no way. And, we argue with him against that. Maybe that could even help us grow more. Uh, I mean, now, it's not even like almost pretty much everything is not even like a debate with me. It's just mainly seeking refuge because there's like no, like I'm not saying he's like good or anything, but or much in, but just what I'm trying to say is there's I can easily see, and I'm not even gonna give thought to anything, any whispers or anything like it's out of the question. But mashallah, that's a great explanation. That makes sense. And I also like the verse 12. How it says he's the one who shows you the lightning as a source of fear as well as hope. And he initiates the load of clouds. So that's really good. Because we have fear and hope, and these like these examples are all set throughout the creation for us. It's kind of makes me when I read that verse or listen to it. I think about fear of the hereafter and hope as well. And it's they're both really good things to have. Mashallah.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the whole process of the rain, coming into existence, God says He initiates the loaded clouds. I mean, they just start forming out of nowhere, and how He drives them. I mean, as a means of distributing His provisions. I mean, this should give us confidence in God that He's the provider and He will look after us. Um, and then also looking at all these animals around us, all the life around us, and how God sustains each and every one of them in precise measure, shows to us that God is the best provider, and He will look after us too, and provide for us, if we do the right things. And we shouldn't have fear or worry. All right. Anyone else has any other comments or questions? Oops. What was that?
Hello.
Sorry.
It's nice music, mashallah.
Something started playing on YouTube. Yeah, so with that thought, nice music, God willing, we can conclude unless anybody has any comments or questions. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you for joining our study. Thank you for participating. God willing, our next English Quran study would be on Saturday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum. God bless.
Alaikum.